Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here. If you're in the back and comfortable, happy that you're comfortable. If you'd like to move up a little closer, please feel free to. Just want to make sure you're in the right room at the right place. This is our Resilience Resources for the Arts, Navigating Accountability and Advocacy. Is that where everybody wants to be? Lovely. All right. Well, thank you so much. You are in for a treat. We have a spectacular group of panelists here to talk us through this very important and very timely topic. My name is Victoria Murray Bettine. I'm the principal of Apex Arts Consultants, and I have the great fortune of moderating our conversation today. And I'll start at my far left and ask our panelists to introduce themselves, a little bit about what brings them to this particular discussion, and then we'll dive right in. We'll also have time for Q&A at the end, so if you've got a question, please feel free to jot that down, and we'll make it a point to get to those questions. Thank you.
Happy Monday. Thank you for being here. I am Michelle Pendoley, and I am the principal at Penn Communications. It's a consultancy that works with arts organizations and arts leaders to help them through the moments that matter most. So what that means on a day-to-day basis is that I'm working with artists, executive directors, boards, often boards, to work through the projects and messaging when the stakes are really high. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and before I launched my business, I was in-house at the Kennedy Center. I have also worked with Washington National Opera and Wolff Foundation, all wonderful organizations that are represented, but today I'm here in my capacity as a communications expert.
Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Wolff. I'm a partner at a boutique law firm, and we specialize in the arts, media, intellectual property, entertainment, branding, and the like. We have offices here in New York and Beverly Hills, and my focus has always centered in the arts, whether it's visual arts, performing arts, publishing, and I am on a few boards and advise associations about how to be compliant with laws and just to have a healthy relationship with their members.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here with everyone today. My name is Cheretta Clerkley. I go by CC. I am a nonprofit executive with over 2 decades of experience specializing in governance and compliance with nonprofit organizations specifically. I'm here today representing BoardSource, where I help to train boards around content development and resources to help their boards stay healthy. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. So let's jump right into the conversation. Curious to know, as we think about this moment, Michelle, I loved how you framed it. You said, let's not hand out cocktail umbrellas in a hurricane. I really appreciated that, the strength of that visual. I'm curious if we can just have a little bit of a conversation about the landscape, right? Reading the landscape, understanding the times in which we find ourselves, and what are some of the early warning signals that organizations might be attuned to, things that maybe are signaling risk, and the inverse of that risk is also opportunity, right? There's a risk, but there could also be an opportunity. So that folks can really work to make sure that they are fit and prepared to handle a crisis when it emerges.
I think the first sign that everyone is seeing happen daily is funding fluctuations. That's number one. Really monitoring the changes, including what's happening within your own individual area when it comes to the sector, but are you talking to your funders and your donors and seeing where there are opportunities and where there are risks? It's something that I think is really difficult for a lot of boards to even know where to start and begin those conversations, but it's something that definitely you want to do at the the front end versus the back end. So if there are funding challenges, your board should be having conversations around what the plan is to mitigate those risks. We have developed at BoardSource a risk and compliance checklist that really helps boards start to have those conversations at their various board meetings so that they can really assess whether or not they're moving in the right direction. Are you looking at merging? Are you looking at particular partnerships with other organizations? And then looking at funding streams. So it's really critical that you're asking the right questions and understanding that you don't want to wait for the other shoe to drop, that you want to start to have those conversations now.
Thank you for that, Cece. Michelle, I'm curious to know if you could speak to us about never wasting a good crisis.
Yes.
What opportunities might folks be able to find in the midst of a storm?
Yeah, so having worked in arts organizations and with artists my entire career, I feel this moment really deeply. So thank you for being here. And the flip side of a problem is a solution. The flip side of crisis is opportunity. That's my Winston Churchill quote, never let a good crisis go to waste, which can seem trite in these moments, and yet there is going to be another side of this moment, whatever this moment is. There's got to be a morning after. And so we need to start planning for it now. And so I think that the value of this entire conference and the value of having these conversations today, and what I hope we get out of this conversation, is giving this group tools to feel like they can be planning for what comes next. I want to kind of bring it down to a specific level, because part of the question was, what can we do now before crisis hits? We can be listening. We can be scanning the room. We can be putting in place the simple tools, which we're going to talk about and which Cece referred to. I also think it's important to recognize that advocacy is part of this conversation, not because it's cheerleading, although we do want to cheerlead, right? We do want to promote the arts. We want to promote what we do. But the reason we talk about advocacy and crisis communications in the same breath is because advocacy is part of what we can be doing right now. In terms of never letting a good crisis go to waste, I also want to point out that the times of stress, the times of struggle, are the times when you can win the most supporters. It's the time that you get to stand on stage and say, this is what we are about. And so part of the some of the tools that I would like to get to are, what are those tools to weather the storm?
Thank you for that, Michelle. Nancy, I wonder if we can bring you into the conversation just a bit in terms of some of the compliance documentations that organizations might want to have in place, or not might want to, but need to have in place in order to make sure that they are not susceptible to any, prodding or poking or sort of finding some of those loopholes.
It's on. Well, if you're on a board that's a nonprofit, there's different kinds of nonprofits too. You have foundations, which are charities, and you can have donations. And then if you're an association, you may be an association. And there you have to really rely on members and member funding and sponsorship. But all nonprofits do have certain compliance to maintain their tax status. You need to have a good accountant that understands that, so you don't miss having filings like a 990 and checking off all the right boxes. But there's a number of policies that are really good to have in place, because you need those policies in order to check off all those boxes when you file your 990. One really important one is to have a conflict of interest policy, because you don't want to have boards making decisions or hiring people that favor someone on the board or may be self-dealing or may help their own business. You have to be careful about all those things. There's even policies just even dealing with the amount of appropriate salary. Sometimes you might have to even sort of do surveys to see if you fit in the right range, so if someone's not being overpaid. Unfortunately, mostly you probably find everyone's being underpaid, but those are some of the things. And then I think just taking time, even in these times when there's a little crisis, is looking and continually go back to your mission statement and to see if, because things are changed, whether you may want to revise it, update it a little. If you're a membership organization, things are changing so fastly. Maybe the type of members need to expand. You need to sort of grow and keep strong by adding more people under your umbrella and looking at the type of members who could benefit from the organization you have. And looking at your bylaws, which are harder to change. Often, sort of the bylaws would be a real structure, but then having a good operating manual for your day-to-day and how things done and who does what is really helpful, particularly when you would have change of leadership. You have sort of a little Bible you can pass on, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a sense. Raise your hand if we have artists in the room. Oh, wow. Okay. Administrators? Artists and administrators. Okay. Multiple hats. Great. So when we're talking about governance, those of you that are wearing the administrator hat, that resonates. And also, sometimes when we have these conversations, people like me can get very buzzwordy and wonky very, very fast because this is the world I live in, right? I live in a world of systems and messaging and press releases. But at the end of the day, the reason we are having this conversation is because exactly what Nancy said is the art, right? Your mission. So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the entire reason that we are having this conversation today is because we want our artists to be able to keep making art the way they want to make it, when they want to make it, without being on the defensive or feeling like they are working from a place of deficit, right? So thank you. I'm going to keep trying to bring it back to the art on stage because that is why we're here. But feel free, especially when we get to questions, to jump in and we can really bring it down to nuts and bolts, right? Boots on the ground.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And, there's something that both you and Nancy were beginning to touch on that I really want to just pull the thread a little bit, which is about change, right? Things changing, the environment changing. And Nancy, you mentioned, taking that as an opportunity to maybe refresh your mission statement or something like that. And so I'm curious to know if you all can talk about, and Cece, maybe things that you've seen across the board within arts and culture, but other nonprofit board framings as well, ways that folks are adapting and how you're able to take agency, in that space of adaptation. Change is sometimes framed as things that fall upon us or happen to us, right? How can we make sure that we're being very proactive in that process and are actively shaping what's happening and really create that mindset and, skill set that's needed to be maintaining your agency in the face of change?
I think the first thing that I would say is that we have to train arts leaders to understand that you are change agents. And so that doesn't just stop in the arts field, it can continue to the board level. And so one of the things that BoardSource really believes in is that we want to create boards that are purpose-driven boards. So that means that you're having these creative and thoughtful conversations, but you're also looking at how are we going to be able to execute that. And so that means building systems that are going to work for where you are, not trying to implement something from other organizations. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And so we really look at how can you leverage scenario planning to be able to think of how are future events going to impact your organization. We think it's really important that you do an assessment of the community, because a lot of times people are on boards making decisions, but then you have no representation from the community. And so you really want to make sure that you are inviting that conversation in so that you can build the correct network and systems for you. The other thing that I would say too is how are you helping to train your boards to have a growth mindset? So not everyone who's on the board now is going to be on the board 5 years from now. And so do you have a pipeline that's going to be able to continue the organization, who is going to be able to leverage new partnerships and funding? So thinking of things so that there's vision and strategy alignment.
Anybody else want to speak to that?
May I?
Yeah, please.
So I'm gonna tell a story, and this is one of my favorite topics, but because of the sensitivity of my work, I can't always speak in great detail. So this is going to be a bit of an anonymized story, but I think it'll ring true for some of the folks in the room. I did a crisis communications audit for an organization this past year. It's a very standard process. I'm sure that BoardSource has a lot of materials that are similar, but you go into an organization and you say, how can I prepare now? And by the way, y'all don't need a consultant to help you do this work. You can go back to your organizations tomorrow or next week and come up with a one-page, what do we do when the stuff hits the fan plan? One page, it can be very simple, but I go in at kind of an enterprise level and I talk with board members and I talk with staff members and I talk with program participants and really start to understand the organization. And so I was doing an intake with an individual board member, and the board, they were amazing. They were deeply committed. They were all giving gifts. They were all willing to put in the work. And they were all really excited that as an organization, they were taking the time to do a crisis plan. Beautiful. And I get to this final board member, and he's just not feeling it. And I know he's not feeling it. And so I made a little note. The entire board's together, and we're reviewing the beautiful crisis communications plan I've put together. And this man says, wait, what do you do and why do I need to do this? Why can't I just pick up the phone and tell the staff how to do their jobs? And I don't have a good game face. But I tried. But I tried because everybody in that room in that moment realized where the problem was going to start. And once this group understood where the problem was going to start, we could work around that. Fast forward 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I had not even handed in my final draft of the plan, and I get a call on a Friday night from the executive director who says, we have a problem. And I said, oh, that was fast. And it turned out that a staff member had done something that a staff member should not have done, and it was a situation that had the potential to escalate very quickly and in direct relation to this board member. So I'm gonna pause there. I think the moral of the story is plan, whether you do it as a board or as an individual. You have to know who your players are. You need to know where you're exposed, and you need to know the processes, right? And that was the benefit of the plan, was that in that moment, the executive director didn't need to do any hand-wringing, knew exactly who to call, when to call, why to call, and even though we hadn't anticipated the exact problem, we had the infrastructure in place to be proactive in bringing it to a good conclusion.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Nancy, did you have something to share?
Yes, and I'll bring it around to what you had mentioned with community. With a lot of organizations, you have a few paid positions and a lot of volunteers. So you have to manage to try to keep volunteers excited and willing to contribute. And I think what I found is often if you have committees that have a specific job, that's really helpful, because then people have something to do, and they can report when you have board meetings. And one of the organizations that helps, because it put together a whole plan what would happen if there were issues, was an ethics and grievance committee, to have it there. And so there's a plan in place if there's a complaint, and how there's confidentiality and what you can and can't do, because sometimes people will expect an organization to be able to sort of act like a court, and it can't. It can only do so many things. But if you already have that there, it's very helpful. And the other thing I found helpful with boards and bringing in community, in addition just to having the executive board that makes the decisions, to have advisors in areas where you can reach out. And I find people really like to help nonprofits, and if you ask them just to be an advisor, maybe it's, you know, in an area where you don't have someone on the board that has an expertise. I've often been asked to do some of that sometimes too. That's a helpful way. And then, and you gave me a thought about, you know, what happens when the boards get replaced. Some organizations will have a number of different board members that stagger, and so you're always having overlap. And they also, one of them if you're have ever been a president, past presidents are always like emeritus trustees. They can come to any meetings. They don't vote, but they can give you advice, and you can choose to take it or not. And that's been a good trick too.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Something that struck me in both, Michelle, what you shared, and Nancy, what you were sharing as well, was this thread of accountability, right? The executive director, you know, in your anecdote, really was ready to maintain accountability. Same in what you shared, Nancy. So I'm curious to know when you're talking about volunteers and staff, right? So when you've got volunteers or a staff, there are a lot of values, right? A lot of good feeling, belief in the mission. You talked about that mission, you know. So how do we take organizations from being in a space of having all the feels, right? You know, we've got all the energy and all of the feels, but really making sure that the organizations are able to align those strong values, those strong principles, those feelings with their values, right? For advocacy, for accountability, for governance, so that when the pressure is on, right, you're responding to the pressure not from an emotive place necessarily, but from a place that is rooted in your values, and you're able to do it in a way that's principled, in a way that is strategic, in a way that might need to be defended, right? If it's called to account. Any thoughts on moving from feelings to values?
I would say you really have to look at what's going to be your real-time strategy, and you can't know that until you develop the framework so that you can make strategic decisions that are actually going to be aligned to what that matrix of decision-making process is. So like Nancy mentioned, you don't want to be in a crisis and then trying to identify who's on your crisis team. You should be establishing those relationships when there isn't a crisis. And you also should be making sure that your board is aware who is going to take the lead, because in some instances, it's not going to be the board. It might be the executive director. It might be the board president. But a lot of times when I go to work with boards and I say, who is the crisis team? And everyone kind of looks around and says, oh, it's the executive director, it's the board president. if there's no clarity around that, that can cause a lot of confusion when there is an issue or instance that comes up. So really making sure that you're carving out time to have those discussions. One of the things that we consider best practices is when you're having your board meetings, you don't want to put crisis communication planning or risk compliance when you're going to be talking about the budget. No one's going to be in the headspace to really have that conversation. So how can you take the time out of your agenda to make sure that you can have a meaningful conversation and people are aware? And we like to propose that you do it in small bite-sized pieces. So maybe it's looking at a legal issue or a communication issue and not trying to solve all the problems today, but identify that. Another example too is a lot of time boards aren't even aware, and sometimes administrators, of what is in your board governance documents. Sometimes it clearly states who is supposed to be doing what and who has approvals. So it should be a living, breathing document, and you should be reviewing that, like Nancy said, so that if changes need to occur, a crisis doesn't come up and you're finding that the plan that you created doesn't align to what your board governance documents say.
Thank you so much. Anyone want to add anything to that or move on?
I would just add that in the scenario planning that you referred to, Cece, is very, very helpful because you start to see where the gaps are. You don't want to wait until you need to run a marathon to start building those muscles and building up your lung capacity. You want to be training for these big moments in the same way that you would never go on stage cold, right? You want to warm up. So that is part of what we are talking about here. I would also say, bringing it back to values, if-then commitments matter a lot in when the stakes are high. So if there is a safety issue, then these are our triggers, right? This is what we will do if there is a safety issue. You got your messaging lined up, broad, right? Because you can't anticipate every single detail, but you can set up the frameworks. Another situation that I've seen come up quite a bit is just leadership transitions. And what if the problem that you're trying to solve is the leader, right? And so that goes to needing your governance framework as well.
Thank you for that. Okay, so let's transition our conversation just a little bit into the hands-on scenario sort of coaching bit of the conversation. We've talked about not knowing what you don't know and needing a general framework to be able to apply, to any given scenario. But I'm just curious to know, in terms of coaching practice, right? If something goes down, the worst happens. A policy change. You talked about funding at the beginning, Cece, some of those funding threats that we've been experiencing, some type of public controversy in your municipality, in your town. What decisions have to be made in the first bit of time, right? 24, 48, 72 hours, and maybe those are different things at each of those sort of time markers. But what are the early things that really need to happen, and who needs to be at the table? You mentioned your crisis team. Who's on the crisis team? And what decisions do they need to make in those first critical hours to get ahead of a crisis?
Well, on my crisis team, I'm going to have Michelle and Nancy to be able to help to support me. But I definitely think, one, you need to have legal review and make sure that you're in compliance, and then also communications. In some instances, like Michelle was saying, if it's an executive director or a staffing issue, HR should definitely be involved. And in some instances, depending on what the issue is, there might be the need for external support, consultation that might be needed. But you don't want to be looking for that in the 24 to 72 hours of having to be able to respond beyond. So making sure you have that team in place. I know I'm going to toss it over to Michelle, but a communication strategy, the messaging piece is going to be so critical. And so you are going to need to have that expertise, and you're going to also need to identify who's going to be delivering that message, because in some instances it may not be appropriate for certain board members. You need to know who that individual is. And then the third thing that I will say is stakeholder engagement, particularly in this climate that we're in right now, is really critical, because you don't want to find yourself making a decision that is going to impact your organization and your community stakeholders, and you're on the other side of that, because that can also have financial implications.
So we've been talking quite a bit at the governance and executive level, but the rubber hits the road with the staff. You said stakeholder engagement, and I would say you can't have every staff member at the table, and you can't have your audiences at the table, but you have to have their points of view at the table. And so making sure that you are listening to the junior person that handles your TikTok, it's a good idea. I love that you gave us 24 to 72 hours. Often when I'm working, I get 4 hours, right? And so you want to be able to set up these infrastructures so that you can move fast. And part of that is really understanding who are you talking to and how do you reach them. Boards are built to be deliberative, right? Boards take the time to think, staff takes the time to act. So somewhere in there has to be a meeting of what are we trying to achieve and how do we get it done. And so that is why the planning piece is so important, because you can't wait until you are in a high pressure situation to start thinking. The other piece that I will add is that in a high-pressure situation, facts go out the window, right? The facts matter, but when we're under pressure, our feelings get high, our limbic system, right? Our lizard brains kick in. And that does not put you in a good frame of mind for decision-making. So part of what I do a lot of work with in coaching is how do we turn the temperature down, especially in the arts. What we do is personal. What we do is emotional. And so when we are under stress, this is not just a job for any of us. And I want to honor that and at the same time put in place messaging and actions that get us where we need to go so that we can keep doing more of what we love.
Thank you for that. So we've got our dream team in place. It strikes me, just a casual observer here, that our communications team would want to communicate. Our legal team would maybe want to say less. That would be the case, right? So how then, when we're really building this type of framework, how do we find alignment within the crisis team itself, right? Those necessary tensions of when to step out, when to maybe hold back, so that we're really, you mentioned sort of that lizard brain, that, fight or flight, all of those things that are happening. How do we make sure that this particular dream team is able to really work in lockstep with one another?
I think it would be important that they're, at least if they're not in the room together, they're communicating what's going on, and that you use your legal team or other teams to review something before it goes out, because you don't want to put your foot in something that you can't undo. And, of course, many lawyers want to say nothing, but saying nothing sometimes could just escalate things as well. So then it's a question of what you say and how you say it, and choice of words, and also to sound sincere. So you really do have to work together and strategize. What you say immediately. And sometimes you don't, if you have a crisis, you don't know all the facts yet. And so sometimes the answer is we have a problem, we know it, this is what we're trying to do, and we'll keep you informed when we, and just admit you don't know all the answers right now. Yeah.
Michelle?
I love working with attorneys because we get to go back and forth and usually come to a very healthy place. I will tell you that I've been on too many calls where it's usually the executive director, sometimes the board chair, who's got the attorney in one ear, me in the other, and it's really deciding, are we going to be escalating this situation? What is the cost of saying nothing? What is the risk of saying something, right? And so there's never a right answer. There are many times when I've said, you know what? There is nothing good to say here, but let me come up with the words that can fill this space until we do have a better answer. But I think understanding what you're trying to achieve in the end, understanding what your North Star is, that's the foundation that will help you decide, do I say something? What do I say? Is there a legal risk? Wow, okay, how can we message around that, right? Rather than putting ourselves right in the thick of it.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Michelle. Cece, just to probe this question just a bit more, you've really helped us think about frameworks and systems, right? I'm curious to know sort of the healthy tension between the executive of an organization and the board, right? Because the board has a fiduciary responsibility, they have a governance responsibility, sort of depending on the framework and the purpose and the type of the board. Who's driving when in that, in some of these scenarios?
And I think that's a great question. I also think that's one where boards sometimes get confused into the operational role versus the strategic role. But one of the exercises that we're a firm believer in is to make sure that there's joint training so that there are scenarios that you put out there and you define clearly who's going to take the lead on different issues or crises. So then that way the board can respond and say, oh, no, I thought the board president should be doing that, or I thought the executive director should be doing that. Having these training sessions where you can actually take real life examples and apply them to your own organization has been really helpful to be able to define clearly roles and responsibilities. And that's an exercise that I would really encourage those in this room to start to have conversations around so that when a situation occurs, not if, when, and quite frankly, in this current environment, every day seems to be something coming down the woodworks. It's important that you know who's going to take the lead and what that response is going to be and how comfortable they are with that response. In some instances, what I'm seeing is some organizations are willing to take more risk and deal with the consequences of what those risks may be. And so having that open conversation so that it's not a surprise when they do want to do something differently is going to be important.
Michelle, did you maybe want to just illuminate on that just a little bit more? I remember we had a conversation where you were talking about the inherent risk in art-making practices.
A lot of what artists and many arts organizations do is take risks, right? We encourage our artists to take risks. We want our audiences to take risks along with us. And that's a good thing. At the same time, risk can be dangerous, right? And so part of building our muscle is being able to differentiate between, okay, what are the creative risks that we're going to take no matter what, because that is who we are and what we stand for, versus what are the risks that actually need to be managed. Is that,
That's
remind me
perfect.
if
That
there's
is, no,
something-
that is great. And it actually segues us very nicely into sort of our last little bit of conversation before we open it up for questions. So begin to start to think about some things that you might want to bring forward. You talked about the muscle, right? Building that muscle. And so the final sort of phase of the conversation here, I'm curious about sort of building durable resilience, right? So we framed most of the conversation in terms of a crisis, that sort of happens or that comes. Maybe it will, likely it will, but it also might not, right? So beyond sort of that crisis response that we want to be prepared for, more broadly speaking, what puts organizations in the most sound and empowered position, right? What structures, what policies? We talked about some of those, at the very beginning. Training, investment practices. What are some of the things that really put organizations in the strongest posture to be able to adapt, but to also advocate for themselves and to, again, maintain that space of agency and leadership through the inevitable ebbs and flows of changes, even if those changes, might not be defined as crisis per se. Is that, yeah, lovely.
I was going to say one thing that I think is really critical is ongoing training for your boards. Yes, people do not do that enough, where they're getting information and access to what's happening within the sector, some legal compliance things that should be updated. All of those things are really critical. And so that is an investment, right? And that is an investment in funds, that is an investment in time. And so really making sure that there's an ongoing plan for how are you going to continue to train your board so that they are going to be able to participate and develop the crisis response plans that you're going to need from an organizational standpoint and to be able to support your administrative staff. So making sure that they have that education is really a key component. And then the other piece to that is regular reviews. Even if you develop a crisis plan today and nothing happens for 2 years from now, you should still be looking at that annually and making adjustments because the framework may need to be adjusted based on where we are today versus where we were, when we developed it. So making sure that you are having annual reviews and you are making the documents living and breathable so that you can adjust as necessary.
Yeah, I think just sort of sum up what I would like everyone in this room to be thinking about, any artist or arts leader. One is your processes, your plans, your policies, your the underpinning, right? The governance pieces. So who speaks? Who doesn't? Does everybody at all levels of your organization understand how to operate in a high-pressure situation? So that's one. We keep talking about the plans and the policies. Two is empathy. For the people who are impacted by your work every day, crises do not live in a vacuum. There are always people on the other end of the decisions that are being made, whether those are, staff members whose jobs are being affected, or audiences who have been waiting for 2 years for a performance that's just been canceled. So, making your decisions from a place of empathy and understanding always helps with helps the situation resolve itself in a way where you're winning supporters rather than transacting a message, right? And then finally is the clarity on your why, who you are, what you stand for, why you do what you do, and that is the art and the artists and the audiences who love them. So as long as you are focused on your North Star, change can be managed, messaging can be managed. Maybe arts can be managed, maybe they can't. I'm still working that out myself. But with those three pieces, I think you're starting from a good place.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Nancy, no pressure if you had anything to add. Otherwise, we're going to turn it over for some audience question.
Nothing in particular, but the lawyer is the team player, and I think the more I understand about an organization, the more I know the different people, it's so much easier to give advice. So I know sometimes people are sort of afraid to talk to lawyers, I think every minute, but often with organizations, it's sort of a monthly retainer fee or something. So you shouldn't be afraid, to talk to lawyers. I've had clients who won't even say goodbye. They slam the phone down because they think it'll be another minute. Not many, but a few. But yeah, so they need to understand the mission and what's relevant, what matters, and they need to really sort of be a member of your team.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Any questions? Anything folks want to raise? Or yes, please come up. There are two microphones here and here. So if you wanted to queue up at the microphones, we'll be happy to engage in a little discussion.
Hello, my name is Bertrand Evans Taylor, Director of Government Affairs at Dance USA. And thank you, because sometimes you have to pay a lot of money for this kind of advice. And my question is, I'm sort of at the point in my career where I'm leading small organizations, and I think it can always feel like your day-to-day is the crisis. Paying payroll tomorrow is the crisis. And so I think my question is, how do you sort of break out of that cycle and be able to intentionally plan for the future, but also regulate your nervous system? More so the first part, though. Thank you.
I would say I completely relate to you. I started out my career in government compliance for a small nonprofit organization, and every day felt like a fire or a crisis was coming out. And so one of the things that I had to do for myself was really try to create what are the priorities, the must of what I have to do today, and then what are the things that I have to say no to. This is just not going to happen in a 12-hour day, right? And so communicating that and being very transparent so that the expectations of your colleagues or board members they understand what bandwidth you have to give. But I think it also did another thing, which was elevate for the individuals that I worked with. Oh my gosh, there's a lot that this one person is doing. And it helped us to have conversations around how can they better support me as a staff person, whether that was through getting more support from board volunteers to help with different tasks until we came up with a long-term plan. But I think really being transparent around here is what is going to be doable, here's what the expectations are, so you can get into that cadence. As you move up in your career, I feel like what you're gonna find is everything that you're doing right now is going to help to propel you for the next level and iteration of things that you will be dealing with from a challenging perspective of working in an organization that is larger.
Any other questions? Okay, I've got one. While you all are thinking of one, a part of the framing of this is around advocacy, right? And so I wanted to lift that up a bit. Michelle, you talked about advocacy and the role that advocacy plays, in the work and in, quite frankly, the sustainability of the field. There's probably advocacy with a big A and advocacy with a smaller A. How does that show up in this type of work?
So at the end of the day, advocacy is about education, There was an excellent session yesterday about advocacy, big A advocacy. I don't know if anyone was there, but I think we get notes from the sessions afterwards. I would encourage everyone to look at the session from yesterday. But in this context, I like that you said little a advocacy, because we need to educate folks about what we do and why it matters. This is not just a buy a ticket situation. This is really showing our value on the day-to-day to win hearts and minds, right? You want people to love not just the art on stage, although we do, but it's helpful if they love the brand that underpins it, right? The art comes first, but the infrastructure matters too. And so when we take the time to explain the organization and what we stand for, we're taking the time to build relationships with supporters. Those supporters are going to be the first people that come to your defense when things get tough. Back many years ago, I used to be very involved in standing up social media programs. And this was the early days of social media. And I just remember being delighted when there would be some controversy online and fans, donors or ticket buyers, people that I didn't even know, would jump in and defend my organization. They would be delivering my messaging points for me because that base was already there, that foundation was already there. And so being able to just take the time on a day-to-day basis to zoom out, right? Bertrand, your point is such a good one. We are so busy and we are tired. I've found that zooming out is can be a relief, but it can also be refreshing to remind ourselves of why we do what we do. And so I do think that there's a feedback loop happening.
Nancy, if I could point this one to you as well as an advocate, right? When I think of the word advocate, I naturally think of our legal professionals and colleagues in that way. What are your thoughts on being an advocate in that sense?
Yeah, well, as a lawyer, you're always an advocate, and there is some capital A advocacy. A lot of the arts organizations have a real interest in protecting things that have legal protection, such as copyright and digital replicas and deep fakes. I'm like very deep into that these days, but then I think. Advocacy for the organization with the little a, I think, is connecting with those members who support you and the people that help, donate money to keep the lights on and all, and maybe bringing them in, give them some behind the scenes. Do things with them so they see how important you are. I think that makes a big difference.
And I just want to add one thing to what Michelle and Nancy said. The whole point of when we talk about risk and compliance is we want to make sure that we are healthy organizations, right? And the more your organization is healthy, the more you're going to be able to build that credibility with your fans, your supporters, your donors. And so I know it can be overwhelming at times when we talk about the nitty-gritty of governance and legal and all the communication plans, but at the end of the day, the organizations that do it best are the ones that are showing us that they are preparing for the risk in advance so that you can have people want to defend you and be your storytellers and brand advocates at the end of the day.
Well, thank you all so much for this fantastic conversation. We do have 5 minutes left, so if someone has come up with a question, yep, all right, there we go. We'll take a couple, and I see one more here, so that might take us to time. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Erica Lynch. I'm a grad student at Pace University studying entertainment management. You brought up this question, but I didn't hear an answer, so I thought I would ask. You said, how do we turn down the emotions in high-pressure situations?
So I'm going to repeat the question for those that didn't hear. It's going back to a question from earlier in the conversation, which is how do we turn down the volume on feelings when emotions are running high? And I want to distill this answer because I think there are a couple other questions. So give me 5 seconds to... You can't turn down feelings. You can't turn down feelings. You need to recognize them and acknowledge them and accept them, and then you need to control how they're expressed, right? And so I think that that's the key difference is we all have feelings. They don't need to come out all the time. This is very quickly going to become a therapy session, which I do feel like is half my job. But acknowledging that there are feelings is part of that empathy piece. And so I think that is part of the trick as well. Where people like me get involved is how those feelings come out, right? Because if there is not a message infrastructure, if there is not message discipline, organizations risk getting in their own way, right? I'm going to stop there because it's such a big question, but I hope that plants a couple seeds.
Yeah. Michelle, if I may, just add just a little additional dimension to that, because I think a part of the answer was in the question itself, you know, which is, and you were leaning towards it in your response just now, so I just wanted to just lift that up a little bit more, is really making sure that you're working from a values-based place, right? So when those emotions are running high, returning back to basics, returning to the values of your organization, returning to the core missions, and responding in a way that's in alignment with those values and with your mission, so that your response is not a reaction, right? But your response is one that is principled and really leaning into strategy. And then I think the one that really resonates for me is, when we play the tape back any number of times, can I defend or make sense of or make meaning of the particular steps that we took to get here, right? Is there a logic behind it? It might not be perfect. You might not agree with it 2 days from now, a week from now, a year from now, but there was a logic in place, right? And a logic that was not one that was governed principally by emotion, I think is another way to look at it. So beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Our last question, you'll take us home.
Thank you so much. My name's Lise Walker. I'm the artistic director of the Strike Anywhere Performance Ensemble. And our organization is small. I relate to Bertrand's comment earlier. I had a situation this week that put me into an enormous emotional state with an organization we partnered with on a grant, an arts council, for a project that we've developed over the last 10 years, a creative placemaking project. And it took a long time to hear about the grant. When the grant maker came back, they said, you know, we understand it was a long time. You can change the project scope if you need to, and the budget. The Arts Council didn't let us know that we had gotten the grant. I found out about it a month later, and they went ahead and changed the project scope and cut us out. It was a big grant. It was $300,000. We were supposed to get 30% of that. And when I found out, I called her and very calmly said, you know, I'm extremely disappointed that we didn't hear from you. I don't understand. And I don't want to get too much into the specifics because I want it to be relevant field-wide and be useful for other people, but I have tried in the most politic and polite way to respond to her, and she's really closed the door. She said, we've changed our programming, we're not using you. And I'm pretty sure she just wants to use the money for GOS, which I get. But at what point do you walk away and just say, you know, I don't have a lot of legal legs to stand on because we didn't have a contract. So I realize that it won't go anywhere if we tried to go to, any kind of resolution legally, but it's incredibly dispiriting and discouraging to have spent 10 years on a really cool project that they used our work samples and project description for to get the grant. And it's not an arts funder, so I don't know that an economic development association is really going to care whether it's folk music or theater or whatever the art form is. They just want to bring money into the neighborhood. So when do you walk away or fight? I mean, I'm a small organization. I don't know if I have the capacity to really manage a feud. That's the question.
I'm going to turn this over to Nancy, but the one question that I had as you were talking is this even the type of partner that you would want to work with if they didn't even have the decency to reach out to you, to tell you and walk you through that, that process of why the decision was made? And so to me, this is a mission moment. Is this aligned with who we are as an organization and how we work and how we treat the individuals who work with us? And I think based on your response, you have the answer to that, right? Even though it's difficult, but mission alignment, I think, is really critical and important, and it has to be aligned with how it is that you work with others and what your organization believes to be the status of a good partnership. And that, to me, says that they don't.
And this may be that Churchill moment where this might not have worked out, but you maybe learn some lessons with another partner, is that you get things confirmed in writing, even if it's through emails. If you don't hear from them, you follow up. Just, it's a hard lesson to learn. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your intense preparation for this. We've been at it for some time. And thank you all for coming, for showing up and participating. Let's give our panel a round of applause.